There's always a lot more to the notes and stuff that I have to take for episodes than people really seem to realize. And that's especially true with the 50 Shades of Grey review. Now, normally when I review a book and movie, I'll go through and I'll just take notes as the thoughts occur to me. And I'll typically wind up with 3 or 4 pages of notes between both the book and the movie. With 50 Shades of Grey, I wound up with 11. There were so many thoughts and jokes and whatnot that didn't make it into the actual review that I thought I would do a separate supplemental notes video on this. Now, I've only done this the one time before, but my idea with this is I would do like a general overview once I finished an entire series. And I could do that with 50 Shades of Grey, but that would require me to read the other books. And I really don't want to do that, so we're just going to do this with the notes that I have thus far. Now, one of the bigger complaints about the movie, about the story, I should say, is the utter lack of chemistry between both Grey and Anna. And one of those is marked somewhat in my first note here, asking, why does Grey go after Anna? Grey is rich enough to clone the perfect girlfriend, someone clearly way better than Anna in every way. And if either one of these characters had any personality, we might be able to attribute that somewhat to building some degree of chemistry. There is a complete lack of that, unfortunately, which leads me to my next few points. What is Anna's character? Is she clumsy, virgin, likes sex? Oh wow, that's incredibly deep. These characters are extremely shallow. Grey is dominant and Anna is submissive. There's very little variation beyond that. These characters are just their sex traits, first and foremost, and that's really all you need. Now, I'm willing to be generous and grant that a little bit of that gets expanded upon, like Christian's tragic backstory, and I think 50 Shades Free has something about a stalker ex for Anna. I don't know, I saw like half the trailer once several months ago, and I don't care. 50 Shades is just Twilight, but without any of the subtlety. Now, one of the points that we did touch on in the review was that 50 Shades was a Twilight fanfiction. The note, or the joke rather, that we left out was, is this really the level that we're willing to go to, just turning bad fanfictions into movies and books? Because there are better fanfictions out there that we can use. The Rainbow Factory, for example. My Immortal, or Dipper Goes to Taco Bell, which would be horrifying in their own rights, but certainly much more entertaining, I think, to certain audiences. They certainly wouldn't be nearly as mind-numbingly boring. Now, one of the notes that I did want to touch on in this review, but decided to save for later, is the argument of content versus form. Now, I've brought this up before as far as, during a live stream, as far as the two differences between that. Now, one of them being, you can have a decent setup for a story, but if it's not written well, no one's going to enjoy it. However, you can have what sounds like a terrible setup to a story, something that would turn a lot of people off, but it can still be very pretty. Case in point, 50 Shades of Grey versus Lolita. Now, we all know what 50 Shades of Grey is, of course. We know that it's terribly written. The story had some degree of potential in that I do believe you can write a kind of a very highly sexualized romance between two people with a high emphasis on BDSM. The problem is, of course, that the characters suck, the prose suck, the author has no idea what she's doing, and so on and so forth. So, you got a story with potential, but because there's no skill or talent or nuance or anything like that in the writing, you don't have a good time, or most people don't have a good time. Now, the flip side of that argument is form. Lolita, if you are not familiar with it, is about a man who romances a 14-year-old girl. They don't go into detail or any sex scenes or anything like that. And that sounds like an absolutely appalling, disgusting story. And in a lot of ways it is, but... And you're going to hear a lot of bibliophiles and big-time English lit nerds like this talk about this, but Lolita is one of the most beautifully written stories I have ever seen. That sounds so counterintuitive, but I'm serious. If you go through and you actually read some of the prose, it's so finely tuned. The word choice is so on point that the whole story, even though it is absolutely disgusting, and by all rights, you want the main character to get run over by a steamroller or something, it's so well written that you just gotta keep going for it. And yeah, I mean, that gets the official book was better seal of approval, strangely enough. I was so opposed to this. I had a professor in college who would sing praises about this song, and I was like, no, I'll never read that. It just sounds too awful. I'll never enjoy this. Surprisingly enough, this is a gorgeous story. Definitely try this out if you ever get the chance. At one point in the book, Anna uses Gray's toothbrush. I believe this is the morning after they've slept together for the first time, and she spends some time thinking about how much that turns her on. Now, I was going to have a whole section of weird shit Anna does. That was the only thing that really struck out for that, so I didn't actually go with that gag, but it's still... that's weird. I don't know, because at that point, it's like the author has run out of ideas to actually build sexual tension, so she just goes with some sort of a weak Freudian oral fixation gag. I don't know, maybe it's just part of some really weird niche kink or something. Now, one of the other things that really annoyed me with the writing in 50 Shades was how pretentious James likes to act. A lot of that, we did get on some of that in the review, discussing the books and the classic literature that she likes to read. Oh, Thomas Hardy, Jane Austen, so on and so forth. Not bad writers, not trying to defame them at all. The problem is James thinks that simply by listing their names, she's able to link herself to them, which is so not true. Jane Austen actually did have a lick of talent, unlike anything James has done thus far. And then just relaunching the entire series from Christian's perspective, that's so goddamn lazy! And yes, even though I've said that I've liked Divergent, the fact that Veronica Roth is doing the same thing with 4, or did the same thing with 4, again, lazy! Tangent Central up here. One of the other ways that this pretentious mindset displayed itself in the book was when Christian and Anna sat down and listened to the Flower Duet, a very pretty but still very basic classical piece. I mean, at that point, if you're going to name drop some classical pieces in order to try to impress me, why not do something that you'd actually have to have some degree of understanding? I mean, not to sound like a hipster or anything, but the Flower Duet is... I would believe that she came up with that name after running a Google search for famous classic pieces. I mean, at that point, you might as well praise the complexity and unique tone of Pachelbel's canon in D. Again, good song, I like it, but I'll leave a link in the description to Rob Paravonian's rant on Pachelbel. It's pretty good. I had to do a lot of research for this episode. My search history looks real interesting now. Now, I didn't go into too much detail on the actual contract itself, but there was one section that struck out at me. The availability clause number 13 is what my note says, in the submissive's roles and responsibilities. The problem with it is that basically it says Anna is not permitted to leave the contract without a contract breach from Christian. And I get what the contract was supposed to be. It's actually a thing that some couples do, apparently, just to make sure they're all on the same page. The problem with this, though, is I don't want to throw the word rape around because the overuse of it diminishes its actual impact, and that's terrible. The problem is if you can't comfortably leave a contract like that of a very sexual nature, then what are you going to do to enforce it? Is like she required to show up on the weekend even though she has a headache, is on her period, doesn't feel like it, or whatever? I don't know. It just felt to me like it was putting Anna in an uncomfortable position where she's obligated to have sex with Christian, and that's fucked up. I had noted in the review that Anna's character is kind of inconsistent. It's bad in the movie. It's much worse in the book because she flips between this wilting flower that can't believe that Gray's looking at her. Oh, senpai noticed me. Versus this towering force of confidence. One of the examples of that being in the contract scene when they were in the boardroom, standing her ground against Christian's wishes. Which, if we had a better grasp on who and what Anna's supposed to be, that might have worked. Like, she's normally pretty confident, but Christian's gaze just makes her melt and feel like a little girl again, or something like that. That'd be a little better. Still not great, but what we got instead is just inconsistent. Like the author wanted her to be two different things at the same time and didn't really think of how to blend them at all. Okay, so there's another point here. We can actually link this one back to the pretentious nature of James's writing style. Every once in a while, she has the habit of going into a thesaurus just to show off, and then we'll go right back to her old writing style. So we'll go from a 4th grade reading level to a college reading level word, and then back to a 4th grade reading level, or something thereabouts. And it's possible that James actually does have a very decent vocabulary. She doesn't know how to properly throw these words in, and it just comes off as awkward. In the review, we included the line, or we included the comment that Anna made that Christian's spreading of a buffet, of an overly expensive buffet for her, was profligate, which means wasteful. And the note I have here with that is, the valet looks askance at my beetle, but I ignore him. That just breaks form. It's distracting. It doesn't meld well. See, it's not just that you have to put sentences together when you're writing, you also have to have a consistent flow that doesn't break the reader's attention. And stuff like that breaks my attention. Now, Anna wasn't the only inconsistent character. There was also some inconsistencies from Gray. For example, the signing of the NDA to say that they cannot discuss their sex lives with anybody or out in public or anything like that. And yet, he will gladly, and I believe he did this on more than one occasion, but he will gladly talk about their sex lives in public, like at a restaurant, which I understand the NDA, I understand all that stuff to prevent a scandal, so on and so forth. The problem is, people are nosy prudes. If you want to discuss things in the privacy of your own home, by all means, do that. That makes perfect sense. If you discuss it anywhere in public and someone catches wind of it, the waiter overhears that as he's helping the table next to you, or the couple in the booth over had their hearing aid cranked all the way up. Well, all of a sudden, you've got a scandal on our hands, and it's all Christian's fault because he brought up the conversation. We're only on page 3 of my notes, by the way. This is going to be a long rant. Without an emotional connection he's willing to admit to, Gray just sees Anna as a sex object. That is where much of the abuse angle comes from. Anna is described as clumsy, although we see very little of it. A leftover from the fanfic, no doubt. Now, I will grant I've complained about Bella Swan being overly clumsy, but Meyer, to some hypothetical degree of credit, did present that better. Because, yeah, it was a stupid, weak attempt at a character flaw, but it was shown, and we weren't told about it. Anna, we were told that she's clumsy several times, and I think the only example of her actually being clumsy that I can remember at the moment is in the first chapter or two where she trips over her own feet walking into Christian's office for the interview. 50 Shades has all of the mistakes of Twilight and then some. Because Twilight is not a good book by any means, but I mean, to see all these mistakes in 50 Shades amplified is disheartening. At least some of Gray's domineering comes from anger, not healthy in a BDSM relationship. The dom should be controlling, but should come from a place of passion, not rage. Now, there is one joke that we had to cut because we couldn't word it properly beforehand. We were going to make an obvious connection to the dom because the joke was obvious. I had to. It ended up getting cut because what we proposed initially came off as a little more mean-spirited than we wanted to. We were going for gentle teasing because I respect the dom. He's accomplished a lot, and good on him for it. I wish him a lot of success. But what we were going to do is make a joke about the dom. Maybe use some footage of his from one of his episodes, and then cut to
footage used without permission. Come at me, bro!
But my editor pointed it out that it was probably going to be a really obvious joke, so whatever, I'm telling you about it now. So I didn't forget about it. The obvious joke was obvious, and I do have a track record for using obvious jokes. At one point later in the book, Anna and her roommate are talking, and apparently Christian found them, and the roommate asks, "Did you give him our address?" And Anna says, "No, but stalking is one of his specialties," I muse matter-of-factly. How the fuck is this charming? In what world am I supposed to read that line? Take it seriously, as, I guess is kind of the implication, and then not worry about whether or not I'm being trolled. Yeah, because she's trying to make it come off as a joke, but at the same time, how did he get the address, Anna? Is he actually stalking you? 'Cause that's not healthy, that's not good, you should call the cops. Now, one thing that got cut entirely from the movie was the matter of Anna's finding a job. Now, the book went into great detail about her getting interviews with 2 different publishing houses, a factor so unimportant that even though it was mentioned multiple times, I kept forgetting about it. One of the interviews is with a person named Mr. J. Hyde. And so this is what I mean when I say that 50 Shades has none of the subtlety of Twilight. If James wants to reference old classic stories or literature in general, more power to her in that. The problem is, if you're not gonna work it in well, it's gonna come off as awkward and forced. Case in point, in my own novel that I'm writing, there are gonna be plenty of literary references. At one point, there is a very destructive hurricane called Hurricane Harry, which is actually a reference to Harry Dresden. You see, because that works. That actually has some connection to the source material. Throwing in Mr. J. Hyde doesn't really have any kind of connection. I see that and I have to wonder, is the guy going to turn to a monster and punch you? Not much thought put in there. Now, there's a joke that didn't make it into the episode, but I think it deserves mention. This one actually came from my old college roommate, and it's in reference to how Anna's willing to do all of this crap and endure all this abuse for the sake of this one-sided romance with Christian. And what we were going to do is we were going to replace one of Anna's lines with a line from Courage the Cowardly Dog.
The things I do for love.
Another joke we had to cut was a bit between myself and Slade, because we couldn't fit it in naturally, and as I've stated in reviews before, sometimes the best thing to do for a joke is to cut it, because it just doesn't work. And at one point, Slade was supposed to ask, because it was her book, she asked, what was wrong with my book? And I would respond with, well, when you gave it to me, it was damp. Let your minds wander on that one. Oh, another terrible line that we forgot to put in the review. My face must have been as red as a communist manifesto. My subconscious has found her Nikes and she's on the starting blocks. I hate that entire bit. Well, that very lengthy bit of notes, that was just the notes from the book. We're moving on to the movie notes now. Now these, we did get more of these into the actual review, so a lot of these are going to be the bits that we couldn't include. Starting with one of my notes. I've just put in the DVD and the first thing I'm greeted with is an ad for The Boy Next Door, some lame horror movie about a high school stalker going after a cougar, which actually is kind of apropos. I mean, a violent stalker guy going after a sex-starved woman? I see the connection. Now, one point that I'll say that I like about the movie, sort of, is that, and no offense to her, this is going to sound way more insulting than I intended, but casting Dakota Johnson was the right move to make because she was not the most stunning creature ever to grace the planet. If they had cast someone like Jennifer Lawrence for this part, then she would have looked like an 11 out of 10. And they would have had to do a bit of work to get her looking not dumpy, not unattractive, but not an angel who just stepped out of heaven or something thereof. Which actually does fit with the character's implied limited self-esteem. I'm not sure how intentional that was, and I'm willing to believe that the movie just lucked out, but I'm trying to be optimistic and give them the benefit of the doubt because, at least in the first movie, the writer and the director weren't awful. They weren't completely incompetent. You can actually tell there's some degree of talent there, particularly in the cinematography. One line that actually got cut from the review was, Gray said, the key to my success is in identifying talented individuals and harnessing their efforts. And my response to that is, well, that's a funny way of saying you got adopted by a rich family. Now, admittedly, the way that Christian runs his business isn't terribly important to the meat of the story, but it's one of those things that would have been good to fill out the universe with if we had any idea how he actually ran his company, or what his company really did, or anything like that. The only thing I can assume at this point is got adopted by a rich family, daddy gave him some starter funds, and he managed to not completely fuck up? I don't know anything about how he runs his business, and in a better written story, it wouldn't be the focus by any stretch, but we might have an idea of what he does. Gray wants to know more about Anna after she tripped over her own feet, asked several standard or inappropriate questions, then spent the entire time looking at her lap. Because nothing's a bigger turn-on than a total lack of eye contact. Yes, this is all tied into him thinking she was a natural submissive, but starting off, his taste in women seems really odd. Outside of superficial reasons, it just makes him look creepy and overly controlling, which he is. But these are all supposed to be attractive qualities, and they're really not. I mean, they're presented as being attractive qualities, and like I've said in the review, his stalking gets celebrated for some reason. I haven't the faintest idea why. Does James want a stalker? Is that what we're supposed to take from all this? One joke that I'm kind of disappointed we weren't able to use, which admittedly kind of came out of nowhere, so I can understand cutting it, was in response to Anna and her roommate talking about Christian after the interview.
You have to admit he's ridiculously hot.
6 out of 10.
You sassy bitch.
Now, there were several small ends here and there in both the book and the movie, a lot of which you could just gloss over, no big deal, which is why we didn't include this next little bit here. Apparently, Gray just happened to have his brother with him at his hotel room. I don't know anything about his brother. His name's Elliot, and that's about the extent of my knowledge. I don't know. He's apparently like a bit of a meathead, and I don't know why he would have been sharing a hotel room with Christian if I'm presuming they don't work together. It seems like a pretty safe assumption. So he was just there for the sake of narrative convenience. That way Christian can take Anna back to his hotel room, creepy enough as that is, and Elliot can go home with Anna's roommate. There are a lot of scenes, especially early on in the hotel room scene, where Gray over-sexualizes himself, but at the same time he's putting on airs about his own celibacy. Very mixed messages there. It was like almost satirically. If the movie was a little more self-aware, I would assume that they were pushing a satirical message. But it's not written that well, and it's not trying to be satirical. It's just bad. And that's pretty much what we got for the movie notes. Not as much as the book, but there's only so much we can actually devote to both of these topics. This was definitely a challenge to get through when originally watching the movie. It took me 2 days and 5 hours between all the pausing and all the notes I had to take. And I don't think I've ever had quite as hard a time getting through a movie as I have since Dragon Ball Evolution, and that was better. But maybe the sequel is bad enough that we can do another one of these entirely. That's assuming that my editor doesn't straight up quit, as he has threatened to do if we ever do review 50 Shades Darker. So I may be editing that myself. But like with the Percy Jackson supplemental notes, I'm sure there's something I missed. So is there anything else that you think should be brought up that I managed to skip over? Please let me know in the comments section, and good luck convincing my editor to do 50 Shades Darker. But we got plenty on our plates otherwise, so stay tuned for A Wrinkle in Time, which will be the next Book Was Better episode. And then after that, who knows?